All right, let's dive right into this explainer and completely demystify the high-stakes world of penetration testing and ethical hacking. I mean, you probably hear about some massive data breach or cyber attack almost every single day, right? As our lives become totally reliant on connected devices, checking the actual security of those networks is absolutely critical. But how do you really test it? Well, the single most effective way is to use the exact same techniques a malicious attacker would use. So today, we're going to explore the actual playbook of the professionals who do exactly that, totally legally and ethically. We've got a super clear roadmap for today. We're going to demystify hacking, break down the three main tiers of security testing, open up that penetration testing playbook, and then lock down the unbreakable ethical code and the very real laws of the digital frontier. Let's kick things off with Section 1, Demystifying Hacking. We really need to clear up a massive misconception here, one that's heavily fueled by movies and television. So, here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. Hacking is fundamentally about research and learning, not necessarily committing crimes. Contrary to the chaotic, rapid-fire typing you see in a Hollywood blockbusters, hacking is simply the process of attempting to understand a system by finding and exploiting its flaws. The vast majority of the hacking community, they're not criminals. They are researchers satisfying their own intellectual curiosity, trying to figure out exactly how things work and, well, exactly how they break. Now, this community is incredibly diverse, and you'll often hear them categorized by hats. So the black hat hacker, sometimes called a cracker, is the one actually out there breaking the law. On the flip side, the white hat hacker is your ethical professional. Then you've got the gray hat, sitting right there in the middle. They usually obey the law, but they might occasionally cross the line. And finally, the script kiddie. This is basically a slang term for an unskilled person who just downloads a couple of pre-made hacking tools, runs them, and falsely considers themselves a master hacker. All right, moving on to Section 2, 3 tiers of security testing. Now that we know who does the testing, let's look at the 3 primary methods used to actually evaluate network security. Think of this kind of like home security. An audit checks if your locks actually meet the building codes. It's a passive, historical check of policies and compliance. Next, a vulnerability scan checks if the door is actually closed. It's largely automated, actively scanning the network to detect known flaws, which are identified by CVE or common vulnerabilities and exposure numbers. But a penetration test? That actively tries to pick the lock. It's a highly dynamic process utilizing actual hacking techniques in real time to exploit system flaws. So, while an audit looks at the past, a pen test shows you exactly what is happening right now. So how do the pros actually go about picking that lock? Let's open up Section 3, the penetration testing playbook, and see the actual methodology professional testers use. It really all starts with one question. How much information should the tester be given prior to the test? This one simple question dictates the entire approach, the cost, and the realism of the engagement. Before a test even begins, the client and the tester absolutely have to establish these parameters. Now, there's a stark trade-off here between the intense realism of a black box test and the efficient speed of a white box test. In a black box test, you might literally only get the organization's name and their gateway IP address. It brilliantly mimics a blind external attack. But because the tester has to spend hours scanning and probing just to discover the network, it costs significantly more time and money. Conversely, white box testing gives you everything up front. IP addresses, network diagrams, operating systems, it completely skips the discovery phase, making it much faster and cheaper, which is perfect if you're utilizing your own internal IT staff for a highly targeted assessment. And then we have gray box testing, which is the ultimate middle ground. Here, the tester gets some general info, maybe the IPs of a few key servers, but definitely not the complete picture. Most professional engagements actually utilize this gray box method because it's highly cost-effective while still requiring a very realistic discovery phase. It's basically the perfect balance for both the client's budget and the tester's methodology. Let's transition over to Section 4, the unbreakable ethical code. Because penetration testing involves actual real-world hacking techniques, having an ironclad ethical foundation is an absolute requirement. When you are literally invited to hack into a system, you're going to see sensitive things. You have to adopt a strict mindset. Default to complete confidentiality. So unless someone expressly tells you a piece of data is public, you treat it as top secret. You will inevitably encounter private data during a successful test, so complete discretion has to be your very first professional mandate. An ethical professional knows their exact limits. For example, you must keep in your lane. If you're a wizard at web vulnerabilities but know absolutely nothing about physical penetration testing, like say trying to talk your way past a security guard, you have to tell the client to hire someone else for that part. Never exaggerate your skills just because hacking looks cool on TV. And most importantly, you never ever operate with the explicit permission of the system owner. There's a golden rule here. If you break it, you bought it. This means you must meticulously plan your tests, sometimes executing them at 2 a.m. on a Sunday to ensure you never accidentally take down a client's business. Remember, you are actively prodding live systems. If your test crashes a critical server during peak business hours, the financial impact could be devastating. Pros go out of their way to minimize disruption, even if it means working through the middle of the night. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, Laws of the Digital Frontier. Crossing the boundary from authorized testing to unauthorized access carries severe federal and international penalties. Let's take a quick look at how U.S. law scrambled to catch up with the explosion of the digital age. Back in the 1970s and early 80s, courts were trying to prosecute digital crimes using traditional non-computer laws, and, well, it just wasn't working. Crime was spiking, which forced lawmakers into action, starting with the Comprehensive Crime Control Act of 1984, followed by intense congressional hearings, and ultimately culminating in a landmark piece of legislation in 1986. That legislation was the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, or CFAA. This fundamentally changed the landscape, drawing a hard legal line against accessing federal or financial computers without permission. It made unauthorized access to things like national security information or financial records a strict felony offense. Now, there is a really critical legal nuance here that every tester absolutely must understand. Under the law, intentionally exceeding the authorization you were given is just as illegal as breaking in with no permission at all. So, if a client gives you permission to test a specific web app and you decide to pivot and snoop through their HR database just out of curiosity, you aren't just being unethical. You could literally be committing a federal crime punishable by up to 5 years in prison for a first offense. And the strict legal enforcement, it isn't just an American thing. Nations worldwide have enacted severe penalties to protect their networks. The EU has directives specifically targeting large-scale cyber attacks. In Saudi Arabia, the anti-cybercrime law carries up to 5 years in prison. Jordan and Japan have broad laws tightly restricting unauthorized access. The global message is crystal clear. You must have absolute, explicit permission for every single action you take. You know, the hacking community is completely bound together by this intense desire for knowledge, mainly because the tools and targets change relentlessly. It's a culture of continuous exploration. The landscape shifts so incredibly fast that if you knew literally everything there was to know about penetration testing today, that absolute mastery would become dated, and you'd need entirely new knowledge within just 24 months. That constant, never-ending evolution is what makes penetration testing so exhilarating. But it requires a massive commitment to never stop learning. The rules, the ethics, and the laws are your bedrock, but your curiosity is the engine. So, looking at the ever-shifting digital battlefield around us, are you ready to commit to a lifelong journey of learning to stay ahead of the next attack?